I want to clarify some rumors. I want to clarify what's going on. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about the name of the podcast. So I thought before we dive into today's episode, I would actually talk about how the name of the podcast came to be. So I was like, okay, I need to think of a good podcast name. And so I was brainstorming and I came up with 2 podcast names. One was Let's Be Blunt. And I was leaning on this one so heavily. And in fact, amongst my friends, Let's Be Blunt was the most popular. And then the other one was Female Genius. And the only reason why this ever came into my head is because at the beginning of the year, on January 1st, I had made a mood board. And on my mood board, as to inspire me to like study hard and work hard and to just, strive for my dreams, I had the little infographic that said Female Genius on it for my mood board to like look at every day when I open my laptop, when I open my iPad. It was supposed to be motivation for me. So when I was thinking of a podcast name, I saw it again and I was like, oh, Female Genius. That sounds pretty cool. But again, I wasn't pretty sold on it because I felt like it sounded very braggy, but very ostentatious. Like, I was like, how can I call myself the female genius? Like, I don't think I'm a genius. I don't think I'm the most intelligent person by any means of the word. And so I felt like there's no way I could call my podcast that. And I remember I was sitting down talking with my little cousin about the podcast names, and she was like, I like Female Genius. I was like, no, it'd be the Female Genius. She's like, no, Female Genius sounds better. And I like that more because the whole idea is I'm using genius not as something to describe myself, but to describe this amorphous sense of things that contribute to our understanding of the world, right? Like people's creativity and women's creativity and how hard they work and their research and just everything. I really wanted to encapsulate that energy in an unfiltered, raw form in this podcast. And I was like, you know what? That name just sings and speaks to me. And also, I have made this no secret that a large motivator behind starting this podcast and the thing that drove me to the finishing point was that I made a list of people that I would love to interview on the podcast. And all of the people that I had listed were women. To be honest, there was Zendaya, there was RF Kwang, there was Alex Cooper, there was M on the Brain, there were different neuroscientists, there was Michelle Obama. These were a list of people, and I just let my imagination run as wild as possible. And all of the people I had listed and I wanted to interview was women. And I was like, okay, so this is something I really want to champion. This is something I really want to understand. And this is something I really, really want to celebrate. And so I was like, you know what? I am going to stick with Female Genius. So just to clarify, it's not the Female Genius because I think I'm the most intelligent person in the world. No. It is Female Genius because I was inspired by all of the women who have done creative works, who have done scientific research, who have contributed to our understanding and our innovation of the world in such a specific way. And I feel like have crafted the way I speak, the way I think in specific ways, the way I carry myself in certain steps of values, and have contributed so much to my understanding of self-confidence to the point where I could even do this podcast. That is what Female Genius means to me. Speaking of genius, hello guys. In today's episode, what do you think makes somebody a genius? What is the makings of a genius? What makes us understand it? Because this word is such a trigger phase. The fact that I named this podcast Female Genius made people think like, oh, like, do you think you're a genius? Like, is this thing? And so I decided for today's episode and for next week's episode, we're going to be talking all about genius.
Female genius.
So everyone has their own different definition of what makes someone a genius. In fact, I bet you if you were to like go around and ask all of your friends, who do you think is a genius? Everybody is going to give you a different answer. You know what I mean? Like if I was to ask my little cousin Angel, she'd be like, the creator of Roblox is beyond our time. He is a genius, or he or she, I don't know who created Roblox. He or she is a genius beyond every reason or world of measure. And then if you were to go ask my dad, he'd be like, oh yeah, obviously Albert Einstein, greatest scientist that ever lived or ever was to live. And when I asked my story, one of my friends was like, yeah, no, Bridget Mendler, she's crazy. What do you mean she did Good Luck Charlie and now she's running space law stations things? It's crazy. So we all have different ideas of what makes somebody a genius. To some people, it's the absolute dedication towards a single subject, the absolute mastery of it, right? And this could be attributed to when you think of musicians like Mozart or Beethoven, absolute dedication to this one singular craft. When you think of performers like Michael Jackson or Beyonce, right? The praise that they get and the reason why they ascribed genius is because of the absolute time they pour in to making their music and their performance and their stagecraft as magnificent as they possibly can, right? Whereas to some people, the idea of being a genius, specifically if you were to go back a couple hundred years, they would ascribe genius to being a polymath. And this is the idea for somebody to be able to have great knowledge in a multitude of different subjects and be able to synthesize them together to bring solutions. So when you think of polymaths or quote unquote a Renaissance man, the archetype of this is Leonardo da Vinci, right? And he has this unquenchable curiosity and this inventive imagination to paint, to draw, to create machinery, to do science, to do literature, to do all of these things. In fact, a long time ago, universities were crafted to encourage polymath ability because at the time they thought the crafting of polymath is what is going to push society to make its greatest inventions and to push the human race forward. So unlike now, where you would have a major or a minor, so you'd pick one thing and you'd stick with it and you're stuck with it for the rest of your life. That is not true. You can always switch and change. But typically you would specialize in one specific thing and you'd go gung-ho. In the UK, around 16, and I think unless you're doing the IB, but still there, you would probably set your mind towards specializing maybe towards sciences or towards the arts or humanities, right? And then when you go to uni, you'd probably pick one subject, so whether you're doing biology or chemistry or geography. And there are some degrees, like my degree, I did natural sciences, so I did a multitude of different sciences, but towards the end you lean in specializing in one. But back in the day, they would have to do a broad array of things at university. From science, philosophy and theology, all of the students had to master these things. And then after they graduated from uni, they would then go do an apprenticeship to master one specific subject. But this was to encourage creative thinking and to encourage people to be able to use knowledge and ideas and important morals and philosophy and bring them to their area of specialism to allow the specialism to grow. And there are many people that believe that this age of specialization that we are currently in, or this idea of pushing people to having mastery in a singular subject, is very detrimental towards innovation and pushing the human races forward. I guess you can argue against that because we have AI. So is there any point of me even talking about this? I don't know. But Peter Burke, who is a professor and fellow at Emmanuel College at Cambridge, says that it takes a polymath, so somebody who spans a multitude of different subjects, to mind the gap, in his words, and draw attention to the knowledges that may otherwise disappear into the spaces between disciplines as they are currently defined and organized. He says this precedents that it's very important that people or students have knowledges of a lot of different things, because the things that we need or the things that have yet to be created are never really found in one discipline, but usually between the bridge of multitude of different disciplines. For example, medical innovation and technology isn't solely found within a biologist that has mastered only just the human body. It's the combination between a biologist, a medical doctor, a psychologist, and an engineer who specializes in mechanical things to bring and synthesize those things together to produce this innovation to allow human medicine and medical technology to go further and further and further. Did you catch my drift? So maybe I'm kind of biased. Maybe I'm leading you guys towards a certain direction that I believe polymaths are intelligent. But then again, you can't deny that the idea of, if I was to plunk down to you a 7-year-old kid and they were just going on the piano like crazy, little hands running up and down the things, you would think, oh my God, this child is a child prodigy, is a child genius. This child is crazy. There are also like ideas of consistent elements of creativity. This idea of venturing into the unknown is very important when society is trying to deem somebody to be a genius. So a genius has to create something that other people or the general public wouldn't have thought to create, or have the courage to create those things that the general public would have never thought to create. And actually, to be honest, most of the time, genius isn't recognized until after the person is dead, until somebody moves towards a society or society moves towards a position where they are able to see that the thing that somebody was doing 100 years ago, that nobody else was doing 100 years ago, but we deem normal now as, wow, that was kind of incredible that they were doing it 100 years ago. We see this with painters all the time, where during their time they were mocked for their work. People didn't appreciate their art form in the way that it's being delivered, and they didn't see it. But then after death, their paintings, the value of their paintings skyrocket. They're like, oh my God, this person is an artistic genius. Look at this, look at that, and look at the way they thought about this and that. But during their time and during their life, they weren't recognized that way. If we were going to do a female genius defined definition of genius, for me, I would argue is about somebody who sets a new precedent, who has the courage to go above and beyond and to use their creativity and their knowledge of different subjects to set a new precedence and allow themselves to flourish in a specific field. So I think it is very important to be knowledgeable about different things, but I think we can argue that genius has to be established in one specific field for it to be quantified.
Female genius.
Now let's get into the science, because it's a necessity at this point. And now I was trying to think, like, okay, so now we kind of have this rough definition of what makes somebody a genius. Like, what do we quantify as somebody being above and beyond the average population, right? And again, everybody has a different definition. I was on a Reddit deep guys, when I tell you, this podcast sends me to the depths of Reddit that I wouldn't even want to send my worst. I don't know, I'd send her there. No, I would send her there. Never mind. I was gonna say I wouldn't send my worst enemy to the deepest, darkest depths of Reddit. No, she could go. She could sing a little further than I did. And so everybody has a different definition, but I was very curious about the neurobiology, as I always am. What makes somebody more creative than another person? What makes somebody more likely to be a genius, Because largely, I do think there are factors such as upbringing. If you have never had a piano put in front of you in your life, you will never know if you are a child prodigy like Mozart, right? This reminds me of those, guys, I'm trying to think of this like in the most sensitive way possible. Do you know when you're on TikTok and then you see like the Brazilian kids, like those little Brazilian kids, unfortunately living in the slums, and they're kicking the football about and they're doing crazy tricks and they look like they're like 7 or 8. And I'm like, bro, these are 5 Messis. Why aren't you guys running to go collect them and pick them up? And then I realized that's probably really common. In fact, there are probably loads and loads of kids who have the potential, in fact, even more potential than the most incredible footballers today, than the most incredible singers today, that can reach notes that as Black Canary level of ear piercing that Ariana Grande and Mariah Carey couldn't even dream of reaching notes that we can't even hear. But a little mouse is going to be like, no, we just never know because we have never put a microphone in front of them. So again, I'm very curious. There are some scientific explanations, but this is something that's very hard to quantify. So there are different theories, and I want to establish before I go on to explain them that these are theories. They are not fact, okay? These aren't taken as scientific law. These are just things that people propose. One idea of somebody being more creative than others is that a study found that when they took images or they analyzed parts of the brains of people who are highly creative or schizophrenic, both people were studied in the test, but that's for next episode. They found that these highly creative people had a lower density of thalamic dopamine D2 receptors than people who were average levels of creativity. How they defined creativity or how they determined somebody who was highly creative, I don't know. I think they maybe found people whose creation was their occupation, maybe, perhaps, but they found they had less D2 receptors. So let me break it down to you, let me give you a little science lesson for you guys who don't really know what I mean by D2 receptors. So there are mainly two, overarching type 2, different types of dopamine receptors in your brain. You have D1 type receptors and you have D2 type receptors. D1-like receptors are excitatory, which means when they are activated, when they are stimulated, they increase the levels of a molecule called cyclic AMP. This cyclic AMP then enhances the activity of the neurons. So they make them fire like crazy. They just basically propel your neurons to go and do what they need to do. D2-like, however, is the opposite. They inhibit actions of neurons. So when you activate a D2 type receptor or a D2 dopamine type receptor, they decrease cyclic AMP levels, which reduces the activity of neurons. As a result, D2 receptors, they are very involved in the fine-tuning of dopamine levels, making sure that unnecessary signals aren't going to everywhere in your brain. So you're not constantly overstimulated by things you don't need to be stimulated by. Basically, they help filter out unnecessary signals. So having less dense D2 receptors, in theory, according to this paper, they think that potentially it means that highly creative people are having a greater degree of information going into their thalamus and into their brain because there is less signal filtering because they have less D2 receptors. I hope you guys are following. Which is an argument as to why potentially these people are more creative. Less D2 receptors are also seen in people who are schizophrenic, and they, again, are able to perceive more things and to receive more signals, which could also contribute to psychotic breakdowns within people who have schizophrenia. I don't know too much about schizophrenia. I think I do need to do more research before I can talk about it at length in this podcast, but I thought it was like a fun fact for you guys to know. Some people theorize, okay, this again is not a proven theory, like fact, that sometimes there are mutations to specific types of brain cells. So there are multiple different types of brain cells in your brain, but some of the most interesting ones, in my opinion, are mast cells and astrocytes. You have things like microglial cells, which are, they're like your immune system for your brain, and you have your, guys, I can't pronounce words, oligodendrocytes. And they just, they're the normal neuron. When you think of neuron, you're thinking of a oligodendrocyte, right? But some people think that specific mutations to specific type of brain cells, because you don't want mutations in your immune system of your brain, because that's going to cause a lot of damage, right? But certain type of mutations, such as in astrocytes, which people theorize is the cause of things like ADHD or dyslexia or autism and OCD, right? Some people think that the specific layering of different types of mutations within these type of cells can help contribute to this idea of genius. And this comes from the fact that people who have these mental ailments or disorders have different traits than people who don't. For example, people who have ADHD are seen to be more creative and are better multitaskers than people who don't have ADHD. Whereas people who have OCD have a greater attention to detail and almost this obsessive approach to completing tasks, which might give them the drive and the potential to be able to master a craft more than their average person. People with dyslexia are found to have a higher degree of visual imagination. And so some people theorize that perhaps a certain combination of these lends itself to the development of the mental environment to make a genius, right? Again, these aren't things that are proven, but I thought it was fun facts to share. So, but hey, like, if you are ever in the situation where you've been diagnosed with a mental learning disorder or a learning disability and you think, wow, this means I'm so dumb, actually scientists would think the opposite, because they would say these things probably contribute to you seeing the world in a way that's very different, or you operating in the world that might contribute to the fact that you might just be a genius, babe. You might just be a genius.
Female genius.
So how does the world try to identify genius? And what are the issues with this? So obviously geniuses, or the idea of genius, is something that we're absolutely obsessed with in society, and we try to hunt for it. In fact, I think we use the word too much nowadays. Everybody's a genius. My dad's a genius because apparently he makes better cake than me, which is an absolute lie. You know, my corner shop guy is a genius, according to my friend, because he markets the cookies in a very great way. Like, everybody's a genius nowadays. I call this lady on Twitter a genius for saying that we should start releasing episodes once a week again. Like, I know I said this a million times before, but I was like, you know what? This lady who's agreeing with me is so correct. She's so right. So one way, and I think the most common way that we are aware of in which the world tries to identify potential genius within young people or children, is the dreaded IQ test. I've never taken an IQ test in my life, to be honest. I don't know why I say dreaded, like I've had a horrible, terrible experience with it, because I haven't. IQ tests are standardized assessments designed to measure a person's cognitive abilities and intellectual potential relative to others in their age group. I have some issues. I have some problems, and there are many criticisms towards the IQ test in general that I don't even think that I need to rehash or add more fuel to the fire, because I'm sure somebody out there has done the job great for me. But the idea that we have defined genius, if we go back to the beginning of the episode, as somebody that is able to set a precedence that nobody has set before, able to creatively apply themselves to situations and find unique ways to solve them, or they dedicate mastery to a single craft, right? How can we then use a standardized assessment to assess that? I guess IQ tests are a very good measure of intelligence, and intelligence might lend itself to being more easily able to pursue and master a specific type of intelligence or skill per se, but I don't think it's a good way of identifying potential geniuses. I'm sure you all heard of Mensa, this idea that if you have an IQ over 125 or 130, you're a quote-unquote genius, and you are in the top whatever percentile of the population, and you deserve to be coveted and celebrated and taken to this special, amazing cause because you have a crazy high intelligence. But there are different things that contribute to success on an IQ test, such as socio-economic factors have been proven time and time again to affect how somebody performs on an IQ test. Bro, not getting 8 hours of sleep, right, affects how you perform on an IQ test. So again, I don't think this is a very accurate representation at all of intelligence by any means. I definitely think that there is an argument to be made about the intersection between talent and genius. And I guess I'm going to pose this question to you guys. How important do you think talent is in being a genius? Because I see them as two distinct things. I think genius is where hard work and opportunity intersects with talent. It creates this nice little Venn diagram, and in the middle, it's a genius. And only some people are able to intersect them in the correct way, which allows them to align it to the point where they are able to unlock that genius, right? But there are so many people with talent, or are talented people, that we don't think are geniuses. There's so many people who can sing absolutely well, but we never think they're like Beyonce. There's probably people who sing better than Beyonce, but we don't consider them to be like Beyonce or Michael Jackson or Aretha Franklin. We don't see them like that. We don't see them as geniuses, right? There are probably people with much higher IQs than Albert Einstein, but we would never perceive them to be a genius like Albert Einstein is, because they haven't creatively contributed to the field in the ways that he has. You know, they may have gotten 100% on every single exam that they have taken in their academic career, but they have never made the amount of scientific contributions that Einstein did. And this lends itself to this idea that IQ tests cannot test the full range of human intelligence. Think things like emotional intelligence, things like situational judgment, right? There is no way an IQ test can subscribe to that and assign that. So again, using IQ tests to measure the idea of making a genius, no. There is this quote that I think, again, further emphasizes this point that our society isn't built to find a genius. Our society isn't built to design geniuses, right? Even though we're so obsessed with the idea of having one. And that is because there is this quote from this philosopher, another philosopher called Arthur Schopenhauer. Guys, I started writing down the surnames I can't pronounce in little phonics so I can get it right. And I'm still Arthur Schopenhauer. Okay. Arthur Schopenhauer, right? Google a pic of this guy, by the way, guys, because he's the most intense looking man I've ever set foot on Google Images in my life. Like, when I jumped, I was like a little bit of a jump scare. I wouldn't want his perceived picture on my wall. He's a very intense looking man. But he said, and I think this quote hits so true, and I also saw it multiple times in my Reddit deep dive, is that talent hits a target no one can hit, but genius hits a target no one else can see. And if the whole idea of genius is hitting a target that no one else can see, how many times has somebody been crushed or told not to do things a certain way because we can't see things the way that they're seeing it? But the whole point of genius is to set a new precedence, to be more creative, to do things, to push the boundaries beyond what the normal people can see, yet we shut that down and we say that's not true and it's not available. A really great example actually is in The Simpsons, and I love The Simpsons. Guys, I grew up on adult animation, okay? And I love The Simpsons. And when you think of The Simpsons, when I tell you who's the smart one, you're going to tell me Lisa Simpson is the smart one, Bart is the bad and dumb one, and Maggie is the really creepy, really cool one, that shot Mr. Burns. But actually, Bart is always perceived unintelligent, but Bart actually has ADHD first and foremost. It's confirmed in one of the earlier episodes in the season where they're tackling the ADHD epidemic in America. But seen across the entire series how Bart is extremely resourceful. He has incredible language skills. He's able to pick up French and Spanish and different languages extremely fast. He has a natural talent in music shown in one of the episodes where he was able to learn drumming so fast. He's just never tried it before, right? However, Lisa is always portrayed as the epitome of intelligence because Bart is the bad boy. He's naughty. He plays pranks on people. He doesn't always say he doesn't think through his actions, so he always says the first thing that blurts to his brain. Whereas Lisa is the more digestible form of intelligence. She reads books, she plays the saxophone, she does poetry, she thinks deeply about her actions, she's a vegetarian, she's socially conscious. She is the epitome of what we would define as a genius or somebody with high intelligence. Whereas Bart has shown multiple times across the series that he is as intelligent, maybe sometimes even more intelligent than his sister Lisa, but we don't perceive it that way. And that Bart-Lisa Simpson bias is exactly why I think society will never be able to construct and make a genius as much as they try to within their education system. They're trying to create carbon copies of each other, people that illustrate the same way of thinking.
Female genius.
One of my favorite examples of somebody who's been heralded as a genius within science is Michael Faraday, right? And he's contributed to electrochemistry and electromagnetism. And for people who aren't adept in chemistry, remember cations and what's the other one? Anions, cations and anions, and all of the things with anodes and cathodes, to the point where he even has his own unit. Faraday, he has his own unit. But fun fact of something I never even knew about Michael Faraday, and I only discovered this because in my internship, I was in charge of decorating the offices, and the offices were named after different influential people. And one of the offices was Faraday. So I was looking into Faraday's life to see if I can get some inspiration for something really cool to put in the office that nods towards his life. And I found that he received little formal education. In fact, he could barely do trigonometry, which my friend Simran very adeptly pointed out that it's so funny that this guy hated maths and then he had a mathematical unit named after them. And so he carried out his science with as little theory as possible because he didn't have the formal training to do so. And he used experiments and practical evidence to justify his findings and theories, to which we still use today, and haunted me in my final exam for my degree. Einstein, who again is somebody that we herald as a scientific genius, somebody that if I was to go to a kid, who do you think is a genius? Albert Einstein. Oh my God, do you remember the little Einstein? There was a whole show named of a bunch of smart kids trying to emulate Albert Einstein, right? He had a picture of the uneducated Michael Faraday of the war, and Einstein said, and I quote, Would Faraday have discovered the law of electromagnetic induction if he had received a regular college education? I think, in a way, Einstein is getting us. This is me projecting on Einstein to deliver a point. I think in some ways that Einstein is trying to make us understand that does our formal education systems allow people to be as creative thinking as possible? The fact that when you get to a certain point, for example, in chemistry, let me use chemistry as an example because I know the academic science field too well at this point. For example, if you can't pass certain maths papers, you will not do well in a chemistry degree. And as a result, you can never progress to the point where you're able to meaningfully contribute to research because they will deem you as not having enough knowledge to contribute to this field. Michael Faraday, the founding father of electrochemistry, did not have a formal education and did not like maths. He didn't like it. Math sucks, okay? I'm tired of holding myself in chains. Math sucks, okay? And he didn't like it, right? And so if Michael Faraday was taken through normal education, and there's nothing to say that he might have excelled in maths if he was taught properly, but if he was taken through this formal education, would he have loved science as much as he did without discovering on his own in this little bookshop that he worked part-time at? Would he be able to contribute in the same way, being bracketed by the same ideas of theories and laws that we become so accustomed to? So yeah, I think Einstein paints us a really great question. And then even this guy who didn't have a college education, who hated maths and excelled in the field of chemistry, right? Ernest Rutherford, again, a very famous theoretical physicist, said that when we considered the magnitude and extent of his discoveries and their influence on the progress of science and of industry, there is no honor too great to pay to the memory of Faraday, one of the greatest scientific discoverers of our time. In today's world, if we had a Faraday and we told him no because he didn't fit within what we deemed as societal's definition of genius, right? We could have crushed it. Going back to that philosopher that I referenced that said that genius can be crushed in childhood, we potentially could have crushed it, and we would have never been exposed to one of the greatest scientific discoverers of all time. So I guess the question is, we now know what genius is. We are able to define it by looking at examples of what society deems as genius. But how does society show up, or how do you show up, or how do you perceive genius? Do you fall to these societal misconceptions of how intelligence should be assessed and how it should be deemed? And, assessments are the way forward, and this is what makes somebody smart, and this is what makes somebody intelligent. Or I hope this episode will encourage you to think very differently. To finish it off, I want to direct you guys to one of my favorite TikTokers, one of my favorite neuroscience social media content creators, on the Brain, Emily McDonald. She had this amazing video called Finding Your Genius. And I was so fascinated by it because I was like, what do you mean finding your personal genius? Of course, there are people in society that go above and beyond and set so many different precedences, but I task you and implore you to go watch one of her videos on finding your focus of genius and to try and find from your unique superpower, your unique perspective, what is your genius? What is things that you love and that you're really good at? What is the intersection between both of them, right? Carl Rogers, a founder of the humanistic approach to psychology, says that a genius trusts his or her intuition in a given field. Ernest Hemingway became Ernest Hemingway and a celebrated writer because he was being himself in his writing, rather than trying to emulate towards somebody else's conception of what a good writer is. And so I implore you to maybe go out and think, okay, what am I good at? What to me reflects my genius? What do I love doing? You would actually be surprised if you allow yourself to be a beginner and you allow yourself to be exposed by what you think you're really good at, not what society thinks you should be good at. Does that make sense? Like, if you allow yourself to think deeply about the things that you get lost in doing and the things that you're able to execute well, think about how many times certain people reference certain skills. Like, oh my God, you're so emotionally intelligent, or you have a great ear for music. You're very good at picking out the very small, tiny details. Don't brush those comments off because they could genuinely be your genius. I think in this whole episode of exploring the downfalls of society, trying to make a genius, what a genius means to different people in society, I really implore you to go and think about, what does genius mean to you? Also, I think this is now time to ask a really good question. Is the title of being a genius even something that you personally strive for? Is it something that you deem important? Because when I think about it, I was like, do I even want to be a genius? Like, do I want to be seen as the best of the best of the best, right? And to be seen as the person, oh my God, she created something so amazing and it was way beyond her time and it's so amazing, because is it generally something you want to achieve? Like, genuinely ask yourself the question, because to be honest, I think some of the saddest and most mentally burdened people in the world are geniuses. And I'm not saying I'm a genius, but there's so many times where I'm overthinking a situation, or I'm reading too much into it, or my brain goes into hyper mode. Like, somebody has a certain interaction with me and my brain is going absolute nuts. Like, I'm going crazy. I'm thinking of every possible different scenario. Again, I'm not saying I'm a genius, but then I was like, if my brain didn't think too much, if I didn't overanalyze everything, would I be happier? Would I be less depressed? If I didn't think too deeply about the past, and if I wasn't so self-reflective to the point where it's crippling, right? And I let my past hold me back from my future, would I be going further? Would I have progressed further? Would I have been happier, right? Because a lot of these people that have created these most beautiful things, from Virginia Woolf to Sylvia Plath to Vincent van Gogh, right, have often the most haunted minds, to be able to see the world in ways that the society doesn't see, to almost other yourself from other people because you are so good at something. So I think naturally this episode has to have a second part. Like, we have to, I don't think it's enough in the short time frame of just talking about making of a genius. What is it like actually being a genius? Do you have to mentally burden yourself in ways of point of no return to allow yourself to reach the status? Do you have to sacrifice your mind for your art or your craft or your field, right? Is the price of contributing, or the price of insanely high intelligence, right, your soul? I will see you guys next week. Is the title of genius worth losing your mind or your soul? So to explore that, I will see you guys next week in the next episode of Female Genius, but we'll be talking about the burden of the tortured genius. I love you guys, geniuses. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Female Genius, and I will see you guys next week, or maybe on Sunday, because your girl has a new mic. So I'm thinking of doing a little footnotes episode. Okay. Anyway, I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys next time on this episode of the Female Genius podcast.